It's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Curt 4-pole trailer wiring harness on a 2024 Ford Bronco. You may be thinking that you are prepped for trailer wiring. In fact, when I put the hitch on here, there's a separate bracket that had this plug inside, and normally if you see something like this on a vehicle, that means you're pretty close to getting 7-pole trailer wiring, just plug and play, which is really nice because you can get generally a connector up front to be able to put a brake controller in place. But things that we found, unfortunately, Ford has made it to where you can't just simply plug in and go. This has to go to the dealership and get flashed. And unfortunately, you are going to pay a little bit of extra money to be able to get that to work. And that's why our trailer wiring may come into play a little bit better, because you won't have to do that. Now, this 7-pole function is very nice if you plan on pulling that trailer with brakes, and if you needed to, you could also do the ETBC7 kit to accomplish that, but you'll still need 4-pole trailer wiring harness. So it's kind of up to you if you go to the dealership and get that factory plug-in, but again, you will have to pay for that flashing. So even though you have this plug, unfortunately, we're not going to be using it today. So shame on you, Ford, for making it to where you have to actually get it programmed. Not a huge fan of that, but that's why we're here. All you need is just 4-pole wiring, or if you plan on putting a 7-pole on later with a brake controller, these are definitely going to be necessary, and it's going to save you that trip to the dealership and paying them to have to re-flash it for it to work. So before we get this installed, let's take a look at it, and so we have a kind of a lay of the land of where everything's going to go. The module is where all the wires connect, and this is going to be the brains of the operation. It's going to make sure that the signals that we're getting from our taillights are going to our 4-pole, and that there's no real risk of backfeed causing damage to our factory wiring. And that's what's great about these. You plug them in and it really won't cause any harm to your vehicle no matter what. So coming off of that module, obviously we have our 4-pole wiring end. We also have a black wire that's pre-stripped, and you may have noticed the black spool of wire that comes in the kit. That's going to run up to the battery for 12-volt signal. So we'll be attaching that a little bit later. The white, brown, yellow, and red is going to be for our turn signals as well as our brakes and running lights. And that has a factory style plug, as I mentioned, that's going to just plug in where the taillight is and be a jumper in between them. There's also a white wire with a ring terminal that's already pre-attached. We'll be attaching that to a ground. The green wire is going to be very similar to our red, yellow, brown, and white wire because it has similar style plugs, but it's got a long spool, and that's just simply so you can run that over to the passenger side. So our module is going to live in this area. So the first thing we need to do is get this portion right here in the inside. So open up your hatch. This plastic part needs to get out. That way we can get to the plugs on our taillight. To get this taken out, first we'll start with our Phillips head screwdriver, and you may want a trim panel tool. I have just a little pry tool here, because to get this out, what you want to do is first loosely just unscrew that center section. Sometimes that back will go along with it, but our goal is to get that pried out, and then also that bottom part should come with it. So if you put a little bit of pressure sometimes on that plastic screw, you're going to be able to wedge something behind here to get the whole plastic push pin taken out. You can remove that whole center if you need to, but the whole thing should come out fairly easily. So there's going to be 4 of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, that we're going to take out. So make sure you have a nice organized spot to keep all of this during your installation. It'll make it that much easier to get everything put back in place. So I mentioned that it can kind of pre-spin. Even turning this lightly, the whole thing is going. So if you just put a finger or nail on that outside edge and then lightly turn this, that's going to allow you to get that unscrewed. And honestly, you may not have to really pry much. If you just kind of pull this out with your fingers, that's also going to work well. Now, directly facing on this inside portion, you'll find that there's 2 10mm screws. We're going to need to take those out as well. And to get this pulled out, I'm going to grab this lower portion. It's pretty flexible here, and then just work your way over those stops, and we should be able to get this pulled out. There we are. And we're going to repeat the same step on the other side. So go ahead and get the passenger side plastic taken out as well. Now we're going to grab our harness and grab the brown, red, white, and yellow, and we're going to route this underneath. So I'm going to come through this corner of the bumper. And if you need to, you can throw a zip tie on here to have something to grab onto it. It's a little tight here, but you should be able to pass that up fairly easily. And then as we go up, we'll find where our taillight plug is. Now, we're going to separate this by pushing on the tab and then getting that to pull out. So just push that, pull up, and we have that out. Now we just need to tee this in. So pretty easy, but we want to make sure that everything's going to close back up. It does get pretty tight here with the plugs, so we're going to try to get this as clean as possible so we can get that cover back on. And if we just kind of slide this in at the same pocket, I think that's going to be enough for this to close up. Now we do have this white wire. We can drill into really any portion in here, but what I think I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier is if we peel back this white wire, we can get our ground made underneath. Now while we have our module hanging down, what I like to do is make sure that I get some other connections made so we'll have enough slack to really get it exactly where we want. So the first thing I'm going to do is get our power wire connected. So it's already pre-stripped. If it's a little spread out, just make sure that you twist this around. That's going to make it easier to get the butt connector on. And then grab your black power wire, and we're going to make the attachment to that just on one end here. So we'll strip this back. And something not included in the kit, but something I recommend is going to be a heat shrink butt connector. It's going to work the same as a normal butt connector, but once you crimp everything down, you'll heat it up with a heat gun and it'll seal around it, creating a nice watertight seal. So for something that lives right behind the tire, that could see a lot of moisture and weather long term, this is a great way to help protect those connections. So what we'll do, we'll get this crimped down and take our heat gun to it. I'm also going to get our green wire routed over to the passenger side, and this is going to go in just like we did on the driver's side. So we have that panel out, we'll just plug that in, make sure it's nice and clean, and then our 4-pole I'm going to route over towards the hitch, and you can use the dust cap that's included to just keep that in place on the safety chain loop, or you can pick up brackets that we have here available to eTrailer. Some hitches will actually have a tab that you can mount those up on. It makes a nice secure mount, but putting it on the safety chain loop is pretty common as well. So whatever you choose to do, but getting this routed will allow us to figure out how much slack we have, draw that back, and get this all cleanly mounted up so we don't have loose wires everywhere. And as far as getting the wires routed, you can utilize the beam that the hitch attaches to zip tie up those wires to make sure that they're going to hold up and not be drooping down. So when running the wires over, I made sure to go over the frame rail, and as I ran the wires, there's also wiring up front on the bumper that I was able to put the wires in there and zip tie that up. So really anything that you can find to hold those wires in place. And the 4-pole, I put a little bit of wire loom just to make it look a little bit cleaner so you don't see all the colored wires. This just kind of makes it look a little bit more OEM. And then I continued on with my green wire and got that attached. Now, I'll lower this down and show you a point where you might want to zip tie the wires down to give it a cleaner look. So once I ran that wire up and plugged it in, I pulled that excess down, and there's a spot with just some opening that you can run a zip tie through, and that's just going to keep it tidy. And once we get that cover back in, you probably won't be able to see the wire, but that's going to keep it nice and taut and not be loose while enjoying your wiring. Attaching it on the passenger side is going to be exactly the same as the driver's side, so just get those all snapped together. And at this point, you can put those covers back in on the driver and passenger side. Now with all of our attachments made, we have all the slack pulled out. That's going to really allow us to get this mounted up exactly where we want it. And then with our ground wire, we can find really anywhere on here is going to be a decent spot to get the self-tapper mounted up. To be able to ground our wires. I think what I'm going to do, just because it'll be a little bit easier, is this exposed metal here. I'll take my self-tapping screw, drill straight up. If you need to, you can make a pilot hole, but this is going to keep that ground wire nice and tidy up here. You won't be able to see it. And once it starts to draw in, just bump it in slightly because you want to make sure that it's tight, but also if you keep going, it can strip out the threads you just made. The main thing is your ring terminal is not able to rotate around. And then as far as the module, I'll get this mounted up. There's a few different ways you can do this, but there's a tab that allows you to run a zip tie through, and there's a bundle of wire in the bumper that you can zip tie that on that's going to keep it in place. You can also use the double-sided adhesive. So just make sure you clean the surface that you're going to be sticking it to. You can do a combination of both. You can use a self-tapper, but honestly a zip tie is going to be plenty to be able to keep this up. It's also a good chance to zip tie all my excess wires up as well. So here's how it looks. I got everything all zip tied up. Again, I used the factory wire that was there to just kind of make a nice secure point for our wires to be zip tied up. Now, all that's left to do is run our power wire up to the battery, and I'll show you the route that I took. Now, when routing the power wire, you really want to make sure that you're not going to make contact with anything that's moving or hot or that can chafe the wire. So obviously your exhaust, you need to be careful, as well as suspension. So the first thing I did was, you can see there's a heat wrapped wire there. I used that to go over our rear cross member, and from here I just really followed the frame. I left my zip ties on here so you can see the path that I took, and as we go over this other cross member here, I just follow it along, and then when it curves off, I did go on the outside a little bit of the frame rail because it's going to make it a lot easier to route up into the engine bay. So just continue that along the outside of the frame, and then when you get to this wheel well area, what we're going to do is just kind of peel this back, and you're going to get a straight shot up to the battery. I ran an airline tube, so any kind of pull wire that you may have to be able to tape up your power wire and pull that up towards the battery is definitely going to help you out. But this is by far the easiest way to route this up because there is a steering column. We want to make sure to avoid that, so keeping it out here is going to be a nice easy way to run it that's safe. I have my pull wire taped up, and if you look down, the steering column is right down there. So again, this is a very safe path to take, keeping it nice and tidy towards the outside. So we'll just pull up all of our extra slack. And I kind of weave this in behind lines and wires that are here just to keep it all in place. That way you don't have to zip tie everything, and it's going to keep it protected. This needs to go to our battery, but we need to get our fuse holder in place, and this is going to protect on any backfeed. And just electrically, this will make sure that we don't have any issues. So let's pop open the cap on our battery, and there's plenty of spots that we can tap into, but we need to use a ring terminal to accomplish that. So let's get that attached first, and then we can figure out exactly where we need to cut our wire. And when you're attaching all of this, make sure you don't have the fuse in the fuse holder. We don't want power going through as we're making those connections. So we can choose really any of these, and this one already has some things attached to it, so I'll just use the same one. 10 millimeter to get that nut off. Place your ring terminal on, and then you can tighten that nut back down. And with that cover placed down, that puts our fuse holder in a pretty good spot here, kind of tucked, but really we don't need all this power wire, so I'm just going to cut off a length of it, and then we can make our attachment to our fuse holder. So we'll strip back both of our ends, and I'm going to be using a heat shrink butt connector yet again because it's in the engine bay, just to keep it a little bit more protected. Now we'll just take the included fuse, put it in our fuse holder. We'll cap this up. And then if you have any excess wire, you can go ahead and get that zip tied up to make it look nice and clean in the engine bay. And that's going to do it for the installation, but you do want to make sure that it's going to be safe to use. So we're going to test ours to make sure that we're legally, good to go with our trailer and that everything's working properly. To test our wiring, we're using a 4-pole tester, which is going to denote when all the light signals are going off. You can do this with your trailer. You're just going to plug in and run through the light signals and make sure that the taillights are working on the trailer in unison with what you're doing with the vehicle. So when running through your lights, make sure you check your running lights, your left turn signal, your right turn signal, as well as your brakes. Once you've confirmed that everything's working properly on your trailer, you've officially installed your 4-pole trailer wiring harness from Curt on your 2024 Ford Bronco.